Great. I'm having a little trouble with my computer, so I wasn't able to incorporate the great choices in the backgrounds that we had available to us, but I didn't want to try to keep fooling with it and miss any time from our afternoon today. So good to see everyone.
Hello, welcome. It's so nice to see new faces, familiar faces. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll get started in just a minute. Happy Friday. I'm Christine Park. I am the AFD 1521 chapter president, also the chair of the music department. And on behalf of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community at Los Angeles City College, we welcome everyone to our town hall. Today, we are honoring and celebrating our community's Heritage Month with a special guest, Connie Chung Jo. Special thank you to the Office of the LACC College President for sponsoring this event. And now, please welcome the President of Los Angeles City College, Dr. Mary Gallagher.
Thank you so much, Professor Park. I'm so happy to be here this afternoon with all of you. Thank you so much for coming. You know, this is a really important opportunity for us today to start the conversation about what we need to do with our communities who are suffering from terrible racism. It's really interesting. I don't really think that when people think of racism, they're immediately thinking of the APIDA community and the racism that has been so prevalent in this community throughout our country's history. And it's a very, very different, and some people say it's subtle, but I don't believe it's subtle at all. I believe the racism that our APIDA community has been experiencing throughout their history in this country has been very evident. You know, there was a substantial immigration of people from various Asian countries in the mid-1800s. It was largely due to the gold rush that was happening in Northern California. And just as other immigrant populations who came to this country, the Asian immigrants were coming for a better life. And what ended up happening as the gold rush wound down is not a better life for these Asian immigrants, but these Asian immigrants were only able to work in very, very dangerous, laborious jobs. It's so, when I think about it, it's hard to even think about this, because the lives of the people who worked on the railroads in California, Nevada, and the western part of the United States as a railroad was being built. Very, very treacherous and dangerous areas. And because the Asian lives were not valued, they were put in the most dangerous position, and thousands lost their lives during this time. And as we start to engage and learn more and more about our APIDA community, we have to understand that many of the assumptions that we make are rooted in racism. Someone saying something like, all Asians are good at math and science. That's blatant racism. That's not subtle racism, that's blatant racism. And while the Asian population in this country has largely been silent, now is the time. The time is now for us to open up and listen to our APIDA community, listen and understand what it feels like. Many of you on this call from other ethnicities and races understand that. Just by what you look like, someone makes an assumption. That is the very definition of racism. And we're so fortunate to have here today with us Connie Chung-Jo, who is magnificently getting out there in all of our communities and helping us to bridge and start to work together to make sure that we understand each other and that we treat each other justly. And I'm so, so happy that Ms. Chung-Jo has joined us today. I'm equally so thrilled to have our trustee Mike Fong here today. He is such a staunch supporter of LA City College, but he is an extremely staunch supporter of the APIDA community, which is his community, but of making sure that we do what is right, and not just what is right, but what is fair and just. And as we go through today, I'm really looking forward to the dialogue that will happen today and that will begin today. I want to thank the community members, the APIDA community members, for bringing us together like this, I'm trying to find the words, for speaking up and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. Asian hate is horrific. Hate is horrific. This has to stop. And together, what we do can make the difference. Today is a very important step for us. And while we did have a town hall before, this is a town hall where we will celebrate our APIDA community and all of the contributions they've made and all of the sacrifices they've made. Because what other communities have experienced with racism, the APIDA community has faced it head on in somewhat a different way. You know, we know there's this glass ceiling that exists, but I believe that with regard to the APIDA community, it's not a glass ceiling, it's a cement ceiling. The breakthrough just doesn't happen. And even though representation in many, many areas of our business and industry, finance, science, technology, has a substantial number of members from the APIDA community who work in organizations such as these, you don't see them at the top. This has to change. Justice is now. It is time now. So thank you so much, Professor Park, for starting us off today. I'm so thrilled to be here today and to be able to listen and hear and appreciate the rich culture of the APIDA community, the centuries and centuries of this deep, rich culture that you keep, that's so important. So thank you again. Here's to Asian American Heritage Month and to many, many, many more opportunities for us to listen and learn and change. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gallagher. Please welcome Mike Fong, our LACCD Board of Trustee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Park, and good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing here today? All right, it's good to see a lot of faces on this Zoom call here, and I wish it were Whenever we're safe, we'd love to see everyone in real life again and in 3D. But thank you so much, Dr. Park, for convening us here today. And thank you for all your leadership and efforts in making this happen. 77 people here today. This is an amazing turnout. And thank you to all of you for your leadership and efforts in joining this important conversation and celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And thank you so much, President Gallagher, for those inspiring words, for those powerful words, and for everything you're doing at LA City College each and every day. And to all of you, thank you so much for everything you're doing at LA City College each and every day for our students in these very challenging times. This past year has probably been the most challenging year of our lives. And as we come out of this pandemic, thank you for everything you're doing. It's so good to see you here. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees for the Los Angeles Community College District, it's my distinct honor and privilege to bring warm greetings to each and every one of you gathered here today for this auspicious occasion. And to the entire team, you might know my story. I love City College. My parents met at City College. And when you talk about opportunities in higher education, they met. It's the power of higher education that brought them together. So I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for City College. And as the co-chair of the API Advisory Committee in collaboration with our chancellor and LACC team, we've done resolutions to denounce anti-Asian hate, xenophobia, and racism recently at our district. We've also been looking at how we can share our stories, and ethics studies is something that we're pushing hard as a district and as an organization. And some timely news this morning is that it passed out of the Assembly floor 44-9 this morning. It's going to go to the Senate. So that's been a lot of hard work and efforts on Assembly Bill 1040 that our district has sponsored. And you might have seen an article in today's LA Times, but bus passes for our students is something that we're pushing hard on, and data disaggregation as well. I see a lot of great familiar faces here and folks who've been doing amazing work. And we know that this time of year brings an opportunity to reflect on the wide diversity and resilience of the diverse Asian Pacific Islander communities. There's over 50 ethnicities represented in the diverse diaspora of the Asian American Pacific Islander community. But we know in the wake of increased hate and xenophobia and senseless violence against our community members, we grieve and we renew our commitment to fighting for equity and justice, especially for our most marginalized in our community, including our elderly and our women in our community. And we appreciate the deep solidarity that's been shown in our community in denouncing xenophobia, anti-API hate, and racism. And it's also incumbent upon us as Asian American Pacific Islander South Asian community to stand in solidarity with our other communities when they're being attacked and being targets of hate and racism as well. And we all want justice. And in order for our communities to heal and our nation to heal, we know that thoughtful, committed individuals, such as everyone here today, can propel our communities forward and create meaningful change. We have faith that community will create a more just, a more equitable community. So let's continue to recommit ourselves and embracing the hopes and aspirations of our students here at LA City College and throughout the Los Angeles Community College District. I see Lillian on the call here today, who's doing a lot of great work with APAS and the community. And to all of you, thank you so much for everything you're doing each and every day. At this time, it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our special keynote speaker. I actually ran into an event this morning. We're making the community circuit, and we're at an event early in Rosemead with Supervisor Hilda Solis and many local elected officials in denouncing anti-API hate, xenophobia, and racism, but also celebrating API Heritage Month and celebrating the unveiling of a new mural at Garvey Park in the city of Rosemead. And Connie Chung-Jo was there. She provided powerful words there. And we're very honored to have her today. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the nation's largest legal and civil rights organization for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. Prior to joining Advancing Justice LA, Connie served as the Executive Director for the Korean American Family Services for 11 years. And she's been doing amazing work around mental health, around domestic and family violence, around acculturation stresses, and has been an amazing ally and leader around the Stop Asian Hate issues. We also did a press conference at Advancing Justice in collaboration with the LA Community College District and other community leaders to denounce anti-API hate. And Connie's been leader on the forefront of these issues. So at this time, it's my distinct honor and privilege to give a warm welcome to Connie Chung-Jo. Let's give her a big round of applause. Thank you, Connie, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Trustee Fong, for that warm introduction. And President Gallagher, appreciate you speaking up in support and allyship with our community, and to Dr. Park for inviting me to be the speaker today. And of course, to all of you who are taking the time out to do yet another Zoom meeting but to be here to talk about this topic. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So give me a second. I can't multitask. Okay. So I hope you're all seeing this here. So Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, for those of you who don't know us, we are the nation's largest legal service and civil rights organization for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. We are located in LA and we have an office in Orange County, and we serve about 15,000 clients a year with approximately 70 staff. Now, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, that name is a brand used by 5 independent and separate nonprofit organizations who have coordinated and come together nationally in order to advance the civil rights of APIs. And although we are independent, we are working very closely together, particularly now to address the rise in anti-Asian hate. The other affiliates are Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, that goes by the name Asian Law Caucus, and DC, that goes by the name Asian American Justice Center, or AAJC. So, I think as Dr. Gallagher mentioned, and as Trustee Fong mentioned, we are an incredibly diverse community. We are not a monolith. We are not only incredibly diverse, but also the fastest growing racial group in the county of Los Angeles, in the state of California, and in this nation. And since the pandemic began, we have been scapegoated for the pandemic, and which has led to more than 6,600 reported incidents of hate against Asian Americans, as according to Stop AAPI Hate, which is one of the leading aggregators and has done such a wonderful job of publishing this information and releasing it to the world. But I want to say that those 6,600 incidents are just the tip of the iceberg. Pew Research Center released a study recently in which they had surveyed Asian Americans and asked if you have experienced an incident related to your race or ethnicity since the pandemic began. And of those they had surveyed, 45% of Asian Americans had said that they had experienced some sort of incident. 45%. This country has more than 20 million Asian Americans. So we're not talking about a couple thousand that has really happened. We're talking about potentially millions of Asian Americans who have been targeted with either a hate crime or hate incident during this pandemic. So why? Why is this happening right now? And you can look at the immediate history and say, well, we did have a president and an administration who during the pandemic started using anti-Asian rhetoric by calling COVID-19 the China virus, the Wuhan virus, Kung flu, which essentially put a bullseye on the backs of Asian Americans. But you have to, I think, look at also the larger context of American history and recognize that there is a pattern and practice when America feels threatened, whether by foreign powers, by disease, by economic decline, that we sometimes scapegoat Asian Americans. And that is because Asian Americans are looked at in this country as forever foreigners. We are forever outsiders. We are not quite to be trusted. It is something referred to as the yellow peril myth. This is why someone like my own father-in-law, who is a US-born American citizen, who is a Vietnam War veteran who was decorated for his service to this country, when he walked down his street in his neighborhood in Alhambra, was called a racial slur because he is of Chinese descent. By our very looks, we will never be quite American or loyal enough. And that has been the history. So I'm going to very briefly go through some of these examples to show you this pattern in practice. So the first one is in Los Angeles massacre in 1871, which happened in Chinatown, where 19 Chinese Americans were lynched by a mob of 500 Los Angelinos. Very few people have heard about this, even though it happened right in our city. 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act that lasted for decades through the 1900s. The incarceration of more than 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. The murder of Vincent Chin in 1982, a Chinese American man in Detroit, Michigan, who was beaten to death by 2 white auto workers who blamed the Japanese automobile industry for the economic demise that was happening in that city. And in 1999, the murder of Joseph Aledo, a Filipino-American postal carrier here in Los Angeles. And then after 9/11, the targeting of South Asians and Muslims. So as you can see, this is not the first time Asian Americans have been targeted after this country has felt threatened for some reason. Unfortunately, we don't teach this very well in schools. And so many of us are not aware of this history of our country. And so one of the things that we advocate is we need to learn this history. All of us need to do that. And we need to start teaching Asian American history and teaching this in the K through 12 education. Because how are we as a nation going to stop this cycle from continuing in the future if we don't even recognize it? So what is Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA doing right now here in Los Angeles to address anti-Asian hate? So first I will mention is we have a helpline in 6 Asian languages and dialects plus English, where victims can call in and report what's happening. We are particularly worried about vulnerable Asian Americans who face more barriers to getting help. And one of those vulnerable populations are limited English proficient immigrants. They face language barriers to sometimes asking for help in English. And also there's cultural barriers. Many immigrants are not aware of what's the point of reporting, what's going to come out of it, what will be the resources and support, which is why at Advancing Justice, we have hired a victims advocate who is a social worker whose full-time job is to hold the hands of victims and help them navigate resources and support. There's additional barriers as well. Another cultural barrier, and we see this, I would say particularly with our seniors, is in some Eastern cultures, there is a value placed on staying silent when there are unpleasant experiences. So you don't air your dirty laundry in public. You don't talk necessarily about unpleasant things. Instead, you're quiet and you move on. Now that is something that in this moment, when we're trying to fight for social justice and address anti-Asian hate, we are having to combat that. There is a Japanese saying of something like, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. That's the opposite saying of what we have in English, which is the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So we are having to counter that cultural value and say, for this situation, it is important that you speak out because you need to be counted for people to realize how big of a problem this is and to continue to put this in the forefront. We have a team of attorneys and advocates who are providing legal services. And in one particular area right now that we're concerned about is housing, because we know that there is an eviction moratorium in LA, but that is going to be lifted soon. And when it does, there's going to be a flood of evictions happening here. And we are worried both about our Asian tenants being left unhoused during this pandemic, but we're also worried about bad actors who might harass or evict their Asian tenants for racially discriminatory reasons. When this pandemic first happened, I was actually still at Korean American Family Services, and we got a call to our 24-hour Korean bilingual domestic violence hotline. And the person who called in was a single mom with a son, and she said that her landlord had come up to her and said, "I want you and your son out of my apartment because I don't want you spreading COVID-19 here." Now, the moratorium prevented a lot of these property managers or landlords from acting on that. But when that is lifted, this is a big concern. Now, beyond that, we are working at raising awareness about this issue, both in our ethnic communities by doing ethnic media outreach so folks know how to reach us for support, but also in the larger community of so that way everyone, whether you're Asian or Pacific Islander or non-API, we want to change hearts and minds and let people know what they need to do and to keep this issue, to make sure we address this. And then on the policy and data side, we do have our own tracker called standagainsthatred.org. That is an online form in multiple languages where people can report it. And we have also captured about 1,000 incidents of hate there. And then on the policy side, we are pushing for changes in laws in order to address what's happening. And I'll go into a little bit of the policy issues in a moment. So what can you do to be an ally to the community at this moment? One thing that we are encouraging folks to do is take bystander intervention training. We, Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA, offer these trainings for free. They are 1-hour virtual training. You can go to our website at advancingjustice-la.org and learn what we call the 5 Ds. And this was developed by another partner organization called Hollaback. Now, to date, Hollaback has worked with not only Advancing Justice LA, but our other Asian Americans Advancing Justice affiliates to collectively train over 75,000 people in this country on bystander intervention. And I'm going to very briefly touch upon what are these 5 Ds. The goal of the training is for you, should you witness somebody harassed or targeted, how you can safely intervene without putting yourself at danger, but in a way that will help support that victim or de-escalate the situation. So the first of the 5 Ds is distract. Can you take an indirect approach to de-escalate the situation? One example could be if you're walking down the street and you see somebody who is yelling at an Asian American, create some sort of distraction that will take the attention away from that victim momentarily. What you could do is you could drop your coffee right as you're passing them, or drop the change in your purse as if by accident. What that will do is just momentarily, everyone's going to hear the commotion or see something, and they're going to stop to see what happened. Sometimes that pause is enough to help diffuse this tension or provide the victim with an opportunity to exit. The next D is delegate. Can you ask someone for help? Can you find a person of authority and commission them, or the person sitting next to you? We've heard a lot of Asian seniors being attacked on buses. If you were to hear something on the bus or see something brewing, go up to the bus driver, say, hey, you need to pull over and deal with the situation that's happening back here. The third D is document. You could be capturing the details of what is happening. Should, let's say, a police report need to be filed, you could be the witness and share that information. Or you could pull out your phone if it's safe to do so and videotape the incident. Just make sure you don't post it without getting the victim's permission first. The fourth D is delay. And delay means after the incident is over, reach out to the victim and ask that person what they need. So I was speaking to one Asian victim who is a woman who, after being verbally berated by a man for a solid 2 minutes and being called just the most awful, terrible things, she said what she wanted most after the incident was over was for someone to escort her to her car, because she was scared that the perpetrator would be waiting for her in the parking lot to re-engage her. And finally, the 5th D is direct. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can directly confront the perpetrator and say, this is not okay to do. And an example of that is what we saw at LAX a couple weeks ago, where a woman witnessed a passenger of an Uber or Lyft ride verbally berating his driver. So she went up to him and she went up to the passenger and she told him, you can't do this, you need to stop. And she did that on behalf of the Asian driver. In that case, she also videotaped it on her phone. So you see both document and direct happening together. So we encourage folks to get bystander intervention training and do this, because right now we need all allies to show their support and get involved. We cannot delegate safety to others to do it for us. The fact of the matter is, Asian Americans right now are so scared that I am speaking to people every day who are saying to me, I'm taking a leave of absence from school because I'm too scared to go back to school. I'm telling my employer I will not return to the office even when the office reopens because I don't want to go outside. Folks are saying, I am more scared of going outside and being possibly attacked than I am about contracting COVID-19. Think about what that means. For many Asian Americans, we are more scared of our fellow neighbors out on the street than we are of a virus that has taken the lives of more than 500,000 Americans. So this is not the time to be complacent. This is the time to get the training you need so you can intervene. This is the time to reach out to your colleagues, friends, and others who are Asian American to say, I'm so sorry what is happening to your community. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? I stand in solidarity with you. For Asian American, my call to action for our community is that we need to speak up and speak out when we are experiencing hate, or if we hear of others who have experienced hate. You can actually report on sites like standagainsthatred.org or Stop AAPI Hate on behalf of other people. So even if you witness it, or if it's something that you hear about and that person doesn't want to report it themselves, go ahead, you fill out the online form yourself for them. It's a time to also be mindful that we need to show up in allyship with other communities of color. That right now we are the recipient of support and solidarity because we are the target, but that we are not the first, nor will we be the last group to be targeted. And we need to show that strong infrastructure of multi-racial, multicultural coalition building now, and acknowledge the fact, for example, that this week, it is not only the tail end of Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, it is 2 days ago was the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And that sparked, through the Black Lives Matter movement, a public reckoning in this country around systemic racism and anti-Blackness that led Greater America to really have a wake-up call and say, the issue of anti-Blackness is not a Black problem. It is an America problem. And we all need to invest all in to address it. And all across this country, mainstream America, corporate America, everyone was starting to say, okay, let's talk about racism. What do we need to do? How do we invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion? That paved the way for now Asian Americans to receive that kind of support, allyship, and attention that we are getting. And we need to recognize that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. One thing that I wanted to mention that had been touched upon in the introduction was the model minority myth. We need to stop, we need to dispel the myth once and for all. The model minority myth, for folks who might not be as familiar with it, was a term that was coined in the 1960s by a white journalist who wrote in the New York Times, Asian Americans are the model minority. You all are smart, you're hardworking, you do well in school, and you go on to these great, successful professional jobs. Now, at first glance, that sounds like a very positive thing to be told, and many Asian Americans have embraced that stereotype. There are two problems with it. First, it's not true. There are many Asian Americans and who are not always successful and who do not and have had a lot of challenges, but the needs of our community are obscured by the model minority myth. And people were so surprised now to hear, oh my gosh, I can't believe Asian Americans are being discriminated against. Part of the reason why people couldn't believe it and get their head around it was the model minority myth says, you guys have no problems. And so that has to be something that we challenge. And I will mention that I have been focusing on the Asian American community because about 99.5% of the incidents that have been reported have been targeted against the Asian American community. But I will say that at Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA, we do serve not only the Asian American community, but the Pacific Islander community as well. And when you look at the AAPI community as a whole, you see quite a tremendous amount of diversity and needs. The 2010 census report showed that amongst all ethnic groups in LA County, the Tongan community, which is a Pacific Islander community, had 49% poverty. And the Pacific Islander community during COVID-19 has had the highest rates of death amongst any community. And that gets lost also because the model minority myth does not capture the full AAPI story. The second problem with the model minority myth is that it creates a wedge, because what the model minority myth went on to say was not just Asians, you guys are the model minority, but then what's wrong with you, other communities of color? Why aren't you picking yourself up by the bootstraps the way the Asian American community has done? And in that way, it's been used as a wedge to keep communities of color fighting against one another. And when we fight amongst one another, what we don't do is we're not addressing the larger big picture structure that keeps all of us down. And so we need to challenge ourselves not to allow that kind of pitting of communities of color. And I would say that includes such as in areas coming up with redistricting, voting rights, education equity, and affirmative action. These are all areas where sometimes communities of color have been pitted against one another, and we can't allow that to happen anymore. And I'm going to finish by sharing something personally about myself. So I came to Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA this past August. And it was not an easy decision to take on the role of the CEO of an organization in the middle of the pandemic. And it was not easy to replace someone like Stuart Quo, our founder and my predecessor, who is a MacArthur Genius Award winner and a civil rights legend in this, in not just in LA, but in this country. And I was really, really happy at my last job. I liked working in social services. I liked being a recovering attorney. I mean, I had practiced as an attorney for 7 years before I went to I came to KFAM, but I had no interest in going back. What changed my decision was this pandemic, and then two things. It was the rise in anti-Asian hate as our community was scapegoated, and it was the Black Lives Matter movement, where we started to recognize in this country the level of systemic racism and anti-Blackness that I had never seen in my lifetime, certainly not when I was practicing as a civil rights attorney. And I said to myself, when my kids and my grandkids start learning about this moment we're living in right now in their history books, because guaranteed, we all know what we're living through right now is going to make it in our history books. And they ask me, what was it like to live through this? I wanted to be able to say I was doing something as part of the solution. And I think it's something for all of us to reflect on right now. When history looks back on this moment, what are you going to be able to say that you did to advance social justice and to address racism and to make a difference in this country? So I'm going to finish with that, and I'm going to leave it open for any questions or discussion people want to have.
Thank you so much. We will continue with the Q&A. If you have questions, please post them on the chat, and Jeff Hicks will be assisting us with that.
So if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and then I'll read them out loud for Connie. Any questions or comments?
Maybe Jeff, if you don't mind, as you're waiting for people to ask their questions, I have one specific thing that I could, if I could recommend to folks to think about. And it's, there is something that Asian Americans get asked all the time, more so than I would say than other people of other racial groups get asked. And that is a very common question of, where are you from? And when people ask that question to us, every time I ask this, Asian Americans start nodding their head. Then the question is, no, where are you really from? You know, and what the question is asking, I think, is usually, what is your ethnicity? When you ask the question, though, where are you from, to an Asian American, what we hear is the underlying message is, where are you not from, which is here. And when you think about this current context of what I said and the history of being treated as a forever outsider, Asian Americans were sensitive to that question. And even when asked with the kindest, most well-intentioned way, this is what's called a microaggression, because it still enforces a stereotype. So one thing I would ask folks to do is, instead of asking, where are you from, ask the question that you want, which is, what's your ethnicity, or what's your ethnic background? And if the question indeed is more of, where are you from? Are you from Los Angeles? The way I ask that question to an Asian American is, I will ask, where are you from? Are you from here in LA? Because by doing it that way, I'm reinforcing that I'm not treating you as an outsider. I really just want to know what, where neighborhood you're from, or what city you're from. So, and for Asian Americans, my call to action to you would be that if somebody asks you where you're from, use it as an opportunity to educate them. What I will usually do is I'll say, oh, I'm from Los Angeles. And then if they follow up and they say, no, where are your parents from? Where are you really from? Then I will say, are you asking me my ethnicity? Oh, I'm Korean American. But I was, and I'll say that to clarify so they know what is the difference. You don't have to do it in a mean way, but there is a way to do it that you don't allow that question to just people to get away with that, which I think is it seems like a small slight, but it is so common for our community, and it really does kind of perpetuate that forever foreigner stereotype.
Connie, I have a question. So I'm an English professor. I don't teach, history. And so I think this is a good question. What is one thing that professors can do in the classroom to help?
I would say for educators, it would be really helpful for you to know Asian American history as well and see how you can instill that into your teaching or be sensitized to Asian American experiences. There is a new foundation called a new program called the Asian American Education Project. And I will put the link in the chat box in a second. But what they are doing is they have a full curriculum that teaches that has 50 lesson plans on Asian American history. And you can actually filter it by age or grades, K through 12 or higher learning. You can have it by different topics like history, world history. I think English might be one of them, and by different subject matters. And this corresponds or complements what was a PBS special that came out a year ago. It was a 5-hour special called Asian Americans. That's really eye-opening. I mean, I learned so much watching it, and I consider myself to be pretty well versed in Asian American, issues. So educators can actually enroll in free classes through that project, where you can learn how to incorporate that curriculum. And I know they've been training, I think 500 educators on this curriculum, but if that's too long for you, even just going to the PBS Asian American special and just being sensitized to it, I think can be very helpful to figure out how does this fit into my expertise or my work.
Good. And then now we're getting some questions coming in. So Susan Niemeyer wrote that the history of Asian American discrimination sometimes leaves out the widespread destruction of Korean American businesses during the LA riots. That's rarely mentioned and included. And she mentions that this part of the uprising should not be forgotten. And then Sean Pomasese said, and this is, I'm just going to read it because it's kind of complicated, that he believes that Asian Americans in general are less cohesive compared to other groups because traditionally they don't share the same language, and to some extent there's cultural differences between the different Asian groups. How could the different disparate Asian groups improve on that and maybe come together?
Yeah, so I'm gonna respond to both of those, Jeff, if that's okay. But I'll start with the second one, which is the question of Asian Americans are a diverse group. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And then if we, we talk about Asian Americans, and I'm focusing on that right now because of the violence has been targeted specifically around largely Asian Americans. But normally when I speak about the racial group, I will usually advocate for Asian Pacific Islanders as a whole. But it is intentional that I'm focusing on Asian Americans when we talk about violence, because Pacific Islanders have not been really the focus of the violence. And it was in hearing from Pacific Islanders leaders who said, yeah, you're right, this is an Asian American experience, and we don't want to just confuse the two. But normally when I talk about Asian Pacific Islanders, I talk about how unbelievably diverse they are, as mentioned. Part of that is we're talking about more than 40 different languages being spoken in this country, not just in this country, in this county by APIs. Amongst all racial groups, as I said, APIs have the largest disparity of any group between the haves and the have-nots. When you look at socioeconomic factors like income levels, college attainment rates, high school dropouts, the largest disparity. And part of that is different religions, different cultures. It's a very large, broad geographical area that we're talking about when we talk about Pacific Islands and Asia. It's also different immigration patterns in this country, right? So America opened itself up in the 70s and 80s to certain countries in Asia and said, send us your doctors, send us your engineers, and we will give you visas to come here, which was different with other countries in Asia, in particularly Southeast Asia, where America said, send us your refugees who've experienced civil war and they've lost everything and they've gone through trauma. So you have very different immigration patterns that have led to a wide diversity of needs, challenges, languages, religions, food, you name it. And so it is both the superpower of the API community, our diversity, but it's also one of the challenges, which is why at Advancing Justice LA, we are constantly focusing on two things when we talk about policy. It is language access, and it is disaggregated data. We know, for example, we had to push really hard to LAUSD to start disaggregating their data between different API groups. We also did that for the AMEMSA community, which is the Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian. And with LAPD, we've been pushing them that you need to disaggregate hate incidents and hate crimes reports, because if you don't know if a group is being targeted because they're Chinese or Vietnamese or Hmong or Tongan, then how are you going to know how to address and respond for that community, right? And so it has been a challenge to be, it is a challenge to work in our community for that reason. And that's also why we say more resources need to be invested in Asian Pacific Islander serving community-based organizations who are on the ground working with those community members, because a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work for us. I want to go back to the comment about the LA riots. So one thing we learned through the LA riots was that there is some definite racial tensions and issues between the Black and Asian communities, particularly the Black and Korean communities. And I'm a native Los Angelino. I lived through that period. I remember what it was like to have relatives or friends' parents who were on the rooftops of their supermarkets trying to figure out how to defend their businesses, and calling into the Korean radio station because calling into 911 led to nothing. So they would call into the radio station to ask for help because we couldn't get the police to respond to us. I also know I also remember the tensions that were escalating within the Black and Asian communities leading up to that, where there were customers in stores that were owned by Korean businesses who felt that they were being disrespected and not treated well, the murder of Latasha Harlins, and that all of it erupted during the LA riots. And I think about how much progress we've made today. And a couple of years ago in Baltimore, Maryland, there were issues there with Korean shop owners and tensions with their customers who were largely Black. And I thought, have we not made any progress that we are still having the same repetition? What I will say I'm hopeful about is right now, I feel like we're starting to see a wake-up call that we can't continue to have that kind of infighting. And I am most encouraged by young people who I think are seeing that, no, we need to get through, we need allyship and we need solidarity. And it's like the millennials and the Zoomers who seem to be getting it and working more in coalition. I was at a rally right after the Atlanta shootings in Alhambra, and there was one of the leaders who was an Asian man was up there. I think he was actually a Buddhist monk, but he started chanting and he started saying, "Stop Asian hate, stop Asian hate. Black lives matter, Black lives matter." He went back and forth, back and forth. And I was looking around these couple hundred people in the park, and you had this like old Chinese grandpa yelling "Black lives matter," and then a second later I'm looking and it was like a young Black man who was saying "Stop Asian hate." And I was like, this is what we need. This is the type of community I want to live in. When I was talking to the co-founder of Compassion in Oakland, who is now, they're moving to have a Compassion in San Gabriel Valley that just recently sprung up. And she was saying that what they do is they pair up, when like a Asian senior in Chinatown, Oakland, asks for an escort to go to the grocery store. They pair that person up with a team of volunteers, largely young people. One of them, they want to make sure speaks the same language as that, as the Chinese granny. But then there will be another one or two people who might be a young Black youth or a Latinx youth volunteer. And I'm imagining this pod of people going to the grocery store together. And this is not only an allyship of multiracial, but also multi-generational. And how many other times will this Chinatown granny in Oakland be able to connect and be connected with a young, Black man in Oakland, right? And that is the kind of beauty that we're seeing in this movement that's coming out of this time period. That is sort of, for me, the silver lining. And we need to encourage more of this. We need to foster and celebrate those kinds of models that are coming forward as a way of kind of trying to think about solutions now past the violence and past the racism.
Good. And then does anyone else have any other questions or comments or experiences they would like to share?
Do. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. All right, so thank you so much, Connie, for all the work you do. And I'd like to just go back to microaggressions that you touched upon earlier. So I think, many of us work in environments where we don't experience such overt racism, but I have experienced microaggressions at my workplace, perpetrated by administrators, colleagues, even students. And I just can't help myself from getting emotional. Of course, I get emotional when I experience something really racist, on the streets or something. Usually I clam up because I don't want to engage, or I explode and I say something back, but when it happens with people that we work with, and even our close friends, in the same departments, I don't think I've handled those situations very well. I do get very, very emotional. I know that my ears are becoming red and hot, and probably my face is as red as a tomato. And I just still don't know how to navigate those instances.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, they're so hard, right? It's easier if somebody says something overtly awful. But when it's like your supervisor, or if it's your client, these are situations where you can't, you don't want to go at them in like a stick. And also, I would say that making people feel, if you call people out too strongly anyways, what people's response is, well, I'm not a racist. Are you calling me a racist? And when people feel offensive, we can't talk to people, right? No one talks well in that kind of situation. So what I try to do is, I think we're always, it's important to remember, we as human beings have a tendency to stereotype, and we do have a tendency for bias. We all need to be continuously working to be anti-racist. That is everyone across the board. And what I would say is I try to think about it from that perspective, so then I don't get as upset as people or want to condemn them, and realize that that is human nature. It's an opportunity to try to gently educate. And so that's why for me, I try to answer things in a way always with a smile or a joke. When I say joke, not to make it, to do it so that way people don't feel defensive. One for Asian women that we get a lot is people mix us up for one another. I imagine if you and I were in a room together in person, somebody would mix up our names, even though we look nothing alike, but that happens to Asian women all the time. And so I had a colleague who did this once. She and I were the two Asian domestic violence advocates in the field, in the state, and everywhere we went, people mixed up our names. And so one day she called out, she said very nicely, I just want you all to know that my name is Deborah and this is Connie. And she said, and even though Connie is young, Connie's younger than me, and and she made it very complimentary. She was like, it's such a compliment to say that, but I'm Deborah. And so she said it in a way that no one was going to feel like they were getting yelled at. But she also called it out. She called out that microaggression. And I think there is a way to practice to artfully respond that you call, and it's not call out, right? They say call, now it's saying to call in. You call people in to educate them on why this is, that they're doing something, and be sensitized to it, but without making them feel indicted.
So I completely agree with you. And that's the reason why I started facilitating intercultural competency workshops. I actually did 4 the past year. But the people who need to be there are not there. You know what I mean? Like, I really, had so much material. I thought it was really, really good content. Yeah, and I was really disappointed that the people who I really, really wanted to be there were not at any one of the 4, workshops that I facilitated. And maybe this is, the same thing at every college campus, but I just wanted to get, yours and everybody else's opinion about that. Like, how can we invite those people who need to be there when the workshops or the training sessions are optional? They're not mandatory.
Yeah. And I agree. It's sometimes like the people who you think need it most are like, oh, I wouldn't need this. It's just not a priority to them, right? And that's why they don't come. And that's why they are sort of sometimes behind in understanding their sensitivity to it. And that's why I also think it's important that we don't, I think sometimes we end up preaching to the choir and we only hang out like-minded people.
Exactly.
Right? And I think, and then we say, oh, that person, they're so ignorant, or they're just this, or they're this, you write somebody off because they're of a different political group or different something group than you are. And I think it's really important that we not do that we try to engage with people who are very different than us. And we also come open-mindedly with them. I speak, I do a lot of these presentations, and although the general content is the same, if I'm speaking to a very corporate America, a bunch of investment banker types in, across the country, I know they're coming from places like Texas and, the southern states, my tone is different. The way I share the information looks different, although the basic content might be the same. So I try to make sure to meet my audience where they're at. And I try to make sure I'm making it sound like it's an opportunity to engage in discussion. I try not to make it a finger wagging situation. And I think that's the best we can do. I mean, change is a slow progress, but hopefully this moment has been a wake-up call to a lot of Americans that the way that America perceives of Asian Americans, it's not right. And people need to, I think, finally realize they need to change.
Thank you. And we are running out of time. And I know Michael in the chat had we have time for maybe one last quick question. He asked, how can the model minority myth be dispelled, and are there steps being made to do so? I think that's a good question to end with.
Yeah. So I think at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, we have what we call our demographic research project. So we use the census data and we create demographic reports where we disaggregate the data to show different Asian and Pacific Islander groups and the specific ethnic groups there. And then we also overlay it with information about other racial groups. So you can just kind of see how APIs are across the board in different socioeconomic areas. So we have a reports in the past that were done with 2010 census data. The 2020 census data has not been released yet, but when it does, we will start putting out those reports again, but they will live online on our website. So you can expect to start seeing on our website, probably starting next year, some of this demographic information. to me, the data on there is important because we want folks to learn that data, to use it as an advocacy tool. Once you know, and we will be doing trainings for folks about how and presenting how you can use it. Because once you know how to use it, that's how you dispel the model minority myth. When I would talk to companies and philanthropists who said, oh, we're doing scholarships for, at-risk groups, for those in the Black and Latinx community. And then I would ask, well, what about for the API community? And they said, well, you guys don't need it because you do so well in school already. And then I would go through and I would say, actually, do you see here, the Cambodian community of LA County has almost the exact same high school dropout rates as the Latinx community. And this is from census data. And you can see those are the two highest groups to have high school dropout rates. And so you can use that kind of knowledge in order to advocate for change. But as a general matter, people just need to know a little bit more about the data, learn a little bit more about this. And then you can just, when you're talking to people, say, well, actually, I know that there's a lot of needs in certain communities. And did you know this about the Cambodian or this about the Hmong, and have that information. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time and your engagement. And I know we went a little bit over, but if you are interested in the bystander intervention training, I put the link for advancing justice-la.org, and you can register for it there. You'll see on our website some other things about our demographic research project and the other work that we're doing. So, please continue to check us out, or follow us on social media, and and just keep being allies to our community.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for today, for having this safe space for us to learn and to open up the conversation and communication. We will continue to do so, and we would love to have you back. And for all of you who are joining us today, this is not the last time we are going to meet. This is just the beginning of it all. And I think you'll all agree that we learned so much today. I absolutely learned a lot. So thank you so much, Dr. Gallagher.
Thank you so much, Professor Park. And Connie, thank you so much for taking your time to be here with us this afternoon. It's so enriching. And there are two things that you said that I am taking away with intention and action. And one is that we will incorporate bystander intervention training. So those of you out there, we will put in place bystander intervention training. I can see how helpful that will be in many, 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 many different applications. So thank you very much for sharing that. And practicing anti-racism. We have to practice it, all of us. All of us have to practice it, not talk about it. We have to do something about it. And if you become aware of something that is happening on our campus, please, please let me know. You can send me something anonymously, but we want a community such as you described to us a few moments ago. That is the community we want. A community of inclusion, a community who practices anti-racism every day in all of our actions and in all of our activities. That's who we want to be. So it's going to be work, but we're in it. We're in it. And I want to give one more shout out to Trustee Fong. Thank you so much, Trustee Fong, for being here with us this afternoon. You are such a great champion for not just the API community, but for community colleges in general, and certainly for LA City College. So thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us. And so I know we have a long weekend ahead. I so appreciate all of you for coming here this afternoon. It just fills my heart that so many people are here today. So thank you so much. And again, thank you, Connie, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend,
Have a
everyone.
great weekend.
Through family and friends, through compassion and acceptance, we all seek to belong. As Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we belong to the brave, to the selfless, and the courageous. Our stories help build this country and continue to shape its future. As artists, leaders, innovators, and champions, our voices belong in every place we call home. From our families and communities to our cultures and traditions. We belong here. We belong now. We belong together.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend. Nice, long, restful weekend to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I so appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So great to see all of you here. Thank you so much for coming. So appreciate it. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.
Uh,
Gallagher. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. And
Thank
Christine,
you.
thank you for everything you do. Jeff, I would love for us to do something around the Asian authors. I think that would be an awesome thing for us to do.
Great. That would
I
be
did
Yeah, that'd
see
be
it in the
fun.
chat. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. And by the way, thank you for helping me with, I'm just not that tech savvy, but you putting it in the chat room like that helped me to dial it back
Oh, no
in
problem.
again.
I
Thank
really
you.
like, I don't know who made these, who made the backgrounds, but these are awesome.
I know, Carrie, Carrie, she's still here. Carrie's here.
Sorry.
She